Let me try recording. Yes, we are recording now. Okay. So, hi, Matt. Welcome to Flutter Stream Day, and it's really great to have you. And I feel really honored that finally we could have some time with you. So, yes, please, we are so happy to have you. Please tell my audience that, who is Matt Carroll actually?
Well, what is up, PK, and what is up, Flutter devs? So I'm very excited to be here as well. From what I've heard, this is the #1 Flutter stream in all of India. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe it is. So I'm happy to be here. It's an honor on my end as well. To let everybody know kind of what my background is, who I am. I was a developer on the Flutter team for a couple years. I just recently left to pursue Flutter education and training. Now, before that, I was an Android developer for about 7 years. So that's really where I saw the ins and outs of mobile development and worked with many iOS developers and web developers, got a feel for that world. And then eventually I saw Flutter come along and I said, I've got to be a part of this. So I created some videos back in the day that were pretty popular, Flutter educational videos. I joined the team, spent a couple years working there. And we can talk more about that later, about what I was working on. And then in February, I left to teach people how to use Flutter and help the world adopt Flutter.
That's great, man. Like if people don't know, he used to have this channel called Fluttery on YouTube. I think it's down now, but I think he'll be back.
I can neither confirm nor deny that statement.
So, what's now? Like, are you gonna create a YouTube channel again? And what's you are targeting right now? Like in terms of how you are gonna help people in terms of education and all those things which you have planned.
That's it's a very prescient, well-timed question. So now, depending on when people watch this, as of right now, we are heading into the week that we'll have Flutter Day and Hack 20. So we're heading into a bunch of really exciting Flutter events. And this week, I will be making a few announcements. I will be returning to YouTube with a new YouTube channel. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can keep an eye out for that announcement. It will be coming in the next few days. And I will also have some kind of presence at Hack 20 that I'm looking forward to. And so I hope all of you watching this get to participate, or at least you get to tune into the stream. But yes, I will be returning to YouTube. I also have a Medium publication that I maintain. I have a website, superdeclarative.com. So I'm working on spreading out to all of the various areas and ways that I can pick up Flutter education. And I'm also partnered with Very Good Ventures, which is the company behind the Hamilton app. So we've partnered together to bring professional Flutter training to corporate teams. So that's what we're offering to kind of help the corporate world adopt Flutter, which tends to have different dynamics and different requirements than maybe individuals who can read a book or watch a YouTube video, that kind of thing.
That's awesome, man. So if someone wants to follow him, then you can go to the website stream.mtechviral.com, and here like all the speakers listing is there with their usernames for maybe even Instagram as well, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, GitHub, whatever we could find. So Matt, you are spending so much time into Flutter like for some time now. What do you think about the new changes which has happened recently in Flutter, like the ecosystem which it is creating after, especially like the inclusion of web and different desktop platforms like Mac OS, Linux, Windows. So what do you think, like where it seems to be going?
Yeah, so like you pointed out, I mean, so from the earliest days, Flutter went to Android, it went to iOS, and we're now seeing over the past year and a half, it's really starting to go to web, it's starting to go to Mac, Linux, Windows. And there was even an early experiment from one of the Flutter team developers that they got the Flutter engine running on Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
So I think this is what Flutter is all about. It's, some people talk about it as an SDK or something like that. I try to remind people that Flutter is a portable UI toolkit. So it's all about the UI and it's all about portability. You take your UI wherever you want, whatever platform you want. And it's still kind of the only thing on the market that offers that power. It's the only thing focused on that ability. And I think that makes it extremely valuable and important for us to utilize out there in the world. A lot of products become viable when you use something like Flutter that wouldn't be viable if you couldn't, right? So if
Correct.
you actually had to build the whole thing on Android and iOS and web, it's just too expensive. But if you can build it primarily 90% with Flutter, suddenly certain products are, you can actually afford to create them. So it lowers the barrier to entry. It opens up a world of creativity. And so I think Flutter being portable is huge. It's a huge value proposition, and it makes it a hell of a lot of fun to work with.
Yeah, I can totally relate to, but what's happening is like, people fight for no reason. I don't know, like they treat these technologies as competitions, like, whether I should do native Android, whether I should do Flutter, React Native, or Swift UI, just for saying, like, so what you want to say to them, like, why that there is a fight online? Like, even I have seen many people who are like, who has a good number of followers, they have done a good contribution, they also kind of sometimes try to bully some platform. So what do you think, like, how you see that?
Well, it's an interesting question. Why is there a fight online? I think it's easier to find something online, or it's more difficult to find something online where there isn't a fight. Uh,
Yeah.
Everybody loves a flame war on the internet. So in your question, are you thinking more about people who are entering the profession, or are you thinking about people who are already in the profession, thinking about changing, or
So
who do you really want a message to on that point?
I want to message both of them, like what you would like to say to those people who are just starting their career and who wants to develop applications, whether for Android, whether for iOS, whether for web. And the second audience is, which is like, they have started, they have done some work, they have maybe made couple of apps as well. So now what do you think, like, where they should go, in which direction?
Sure. So I'll take on both of those. We'll start with the people who are entering the industry.
Yes.
When you're looking at entering the industry, you have to look at, what does it take for me to go from no knowledge on a topic? Like, if you're coming in, whether you're pursuing a computer science degree or whether you're self-taught, you start from this position where you don't really know how anything works, and then you have to get to the position where you know enough that you can ship a product and like not be legally liable, and not destroy people's data with it and things like this. So you have to go from nothing to a pretty high bar. Now, when you're considering that, it's you probably want to move as quickly as you can. You don't want to be stuck for 5 to 10 years trying to figure something out before you can really be productive. The thing about Flutter is that you can operate at an incredibly high level, production quality level in many regards, very quickly with an otherwise limited understanding. So if I were back in college and I wanted to build apps and I wanted to build websites, Flutter would absolutely be the number one technology that I go for, because it's so approachable. You can get in there, you can do so much with so little. The code makes a lot more sense, in my opinion, than many other attempts at user interfaces. It gives you so much control. You can be so creative. So if you're jumping into the industry, I can't think of any application technology that's more powerful for your productivity as someone who's learning development than Flutter is. So that's a challenge that's uniquely faced by people who are entering the industry. And that's different than those who are a 5 or 10-year Android developer, iOS developer, web developer, that kind of thing. The calculus on that side is going to be a bit different, because you've already invested so much time into this particular skill set. I suppose if you don't have a personal desire to leave your platform, and I mentioned I was an Android developer. So I was an Android developer for 7 years. And the only reason that I was an Android developer is because it looked like there were just as many headaches and frustrations on iOS and web.
Yeah.
So it's not that I wanted to be there. It's just that there wasn't any alternative. So the instant I saw an alternative, I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm done with Android, and that's enough for me. But for people who actually enjoy building Android apps using the Android SDK, and they enjoy building iOS apps using the iOS SDK and web, etc., for those people, it's really a question of, do you believe that the technologies you're using are going to start shrinking? If they're on an eventual path to elimination, it's probably not in your interest to continue a full-fledged career in that area. So let's imagine that over time, more and more apps become Flutter apps. for a number of reasons that we can talk about, but let's just assume for a moment that they do. Well, there will always be apps that require Objective-C or Swift, Kotlin or Java. There will always be apps that are not Flutter apps. But if 90% of all apps are Flutter apps, the demand for your position just decreased by 90%. And at the same time, the increase for Flutter developers just went through the roof. If that's the path the world is on, it's in your interest to at least learn this technology, become proficient with it, and you have that in your back pocket. On the other hand, if you enjoy using the SDKs that are already available, and if you don't think there's going to be a shortage for jobs there and you're happy where you are, I mean, honestly, I'm not here to tell you that you need to switch careers, because I don't want to be a part of that flame war process. I'm just looking at tools and what they provide, what they don't provide, trends in the industry. And for me, Flutter is just a much better daily experience. I'm happier in my life with Flutter than I was on a daily basis with Android, and that's why I'm here. So I think for new developers, it's 100% new developers should at least explore Flutter and see if it works for them. Existing developers, look at your career trajectory and you decide for yourself, but it's possible that a lot of these apps are going to be moving to Flutter, and you got to decide what you're going to do in that situation.
That's a really great answer. And in fact, I have the same kind of feeling as well, because I also started with Android. I worked on Android for a couple of years. And then the only problem with me was like, I used to feel like I'm not productive enough because of the time I used to waste on many things. And the reason was like, I was looking for other alternatives. But at that time, as you said, like, there were no such alternatives. Like I tried using Xamarin for 1 year, and it worked fine, but there were many things which are missing. And that's when I thought about like, let's try to play with this thing, which is Flutter. It was in a very, very new situation, but what I felt was that it was solving a problem. It was solving a developer's pain, especially mobile app developers, because if we see web from some time, it's going in that way. Like, people just open any kind of laptop, they do some stuff, it reflects those changes quickly. But mobile app developer already, like, like since some year now, they have been going through the same pain of taking like I think people treat it mobile app development as a difficult job itself. So that's when I think, yeah, when Flutter came, I also feel very much productive. And by the time, like, if it is solving all of the problems or all of the use cases which I have, then it is fine to use it. If there will be something which I think that cannot be solved with Flutter, then obviously I will look for other options. But until unless there is anything, I think it's pretty good, and it's going in the right direction as well, as you said. So yeah. But
yeah, I think you make a good point there when you talk about it solving a problem. And
yeah,
this is what drives me nuts about a lot of these people that make this a flame war online. I think the reason that people are adopting Flutter, it's not like JavaScript libraries on the web where people just want to be cool and do the newest thing. People have given up their entire existing career to specialize in Flutter because they were so unhappy in that previous career, and they're so much happier with Flutter. That's not a minor issue. And so there are people that try to argue foundationally why something like Flutter shouldn't be needed or why it shouldn't have to exist. And I'm just like, but it does exist, and people are choosing it for real reasons. And so you're not going to guilt me into not using Flutter because it doesn't match up to your utopian expectations. There are things that make other development options difficult and frustrating and time consuming. And people have been complaining about it for over 10 years now. I mean, the iPhone was 2007, right? So people have been complaining for over a decade. And you notice that the teams affiliated with those projects didn't really change it until first, React.js came out, and that had a lot of impact on the web. But then notice that as Flutter started taking off, suddenly we hear about Swift UI and Jetpack Compose.
yeah.
So I guess those things weren't so impossible this whole time, were they? It's just that it was kind of a monopolistic situation where it was like, well, if we don't create what you want, where are you going to go? You don't have any other options. And the instant we did, we became Flutter developers.
That's true. Like you talked about Jetpack Compose and Swift UI. Like I want to ask you that what is like what is better, like whether Jetpack Compose or Swift UI or Flutter. Like I think the declarative UI pattern is everywhere now. People have started like liking it. Everyone like, or even on web, iOS, Android, we can see it everywhere. So what do you think, like how Flutter SDK itself is different from, like the way we write Flutter apps is different from Jetpack Compose or Swift UI? Because I think you have played with both of them. So what's your view on that? Like how it is different, or who is doing
Yep.
it better? Maybe that should be the question.
Yeah, so you and I talked about this the other day. I've played with them a little bit, a tiny bit. By no means am I educated on those two solutions, especially not at an architectural level. But I have gotten a feel for some of the syntax, and there are a lot of things we could say on this. So first, let me give them credit where it's due. If I was still an Android developer, 100% I would be pulling in Jetpack Compose as quickly as humanly possible. I don't think there's any denying that moving towards declarative UI is far better, far easier to use than what's currently available on Android. And the exact same thing for iOS. To move out of the world of storyboards combined with imperative Objective-C UI, to go from that to Swift UI, 100% I would do that. So any critique that I have isn't like, hey, these things shouldn't exist. If I were stuck on one of those platforms, I would adopt it in a heartbeat because I think they are significant improvements. Now, when you start talking about Swift UI and Jetpack Compose, comparing, contrasting to Flutter from, let's say, an adoption standpoint, the issue here is the business value. You as a developer are going to love Swift UI over the old way. Same thing with Jetpack Compose.
Yeah.
But your company is spending the exact same amount of money, or most of it. You will be a little bit faster with those. So your company will save some money. But for the most part, there are still 2 teams, 4 languages, 2 frameworks, and that doesn't even include the web. The business reality really hasn't changed. It's just your developer happiness that is somewhat better. And again, I give credit to that. It's better to have happier developers than unhappy developers.
That's true.
But when you adopt Flutter, you gain the developer happiness increase, but you also unify your language, 1 language instead of 4, 1 set of UI APIs instead of 2. And actually, even that's a little giving too much credit to Android and iOS, because what are the odds that you are truly going to be able to move 100% to Swift UI and Jetpack Compose on day 1? You probably have to support the old imperative stuff for a while in various places. That's legacy code that you're stuck with. That's why when I say 4 languages, that's Swift and Objective-C. Why? Because there's still a bunch of Objective-C code out there. That's Kotlin and Java. Why? Because there's still a bunch of Java code out there. So for a while, it's going to be Jetpack Compose plus the view hierarchy. It's going to be Swift UI plus the UI view hierarchy, whatever you call that on iOS. So if you move to Flutter, you kill all of that legacy overnight. 1 language, 1 set of APIs, and you can you still need a few experts on the platform, but beyond that, you mostly just have a Flutter team. And that includes web, by the way, and desktop. They're all Flutter developers now. That goes so far beyond the language and the SDK that I use. Now it's, hey, the business is saving 50% on engineering payroll. And by the way, payroll is typically the #1 expense for most companies, especially startups, agencies, contract shops. Saving half on payroll is like an unbelievable advantage. So I don't know what the Swift UI and Jetpack Compose proponents think on that matter. I mean, has anyone talked to you about that side of it? Have you heard anyone explaining why Jetpack Compose and Swift UI would be preferable from a business perspective?
No, I mean, I haven't a chat with like any of people. Like I don't know how many people are still using it, to be honest. Like I still think it's it's also in a very early phase. What I could say about Flutter as well, like few years back, like 2 years back. The same thing is today with Jetpack Compose or Swift UI. Jetpack Compose is not ready, to be honest, as of now. What I see, like they have done good work in last few months, of which few weeks ago, not few weeks, like just one week ago, I guess they announced Android 11, and now their APIs for Jetpack Compose looks much better to me. But from business side of view, I don't know like how many people are using it. I had like no any discussion with any of the people who are using it. But I think you are right about the business aspect, because even if I talk about India, to be honest, like there are many service based companies, right? And what they will do is that they will always try to use something which can, like, you know, which does not require many people, and which can also be less expensive as compared to anything else. Like if they use Flutter, and if it is actually solving a particular use case, let's say they want to make an e-commerce application, and it's solving that problem, and it is giving like Android app as well, iOS app as well. I'm not talking about web or other platforms. Let's just stick to Android and iOS itself. Then also they it saves them, like they don't need much developers. They can just have one single developer, or maybe a couple of Flutter developers, and they can like do all that stuff using a single code base. They and their client will also be happy, because for the clients as well, I guess it will be lesser expensive, because you know, obviously the number of developers are reduced, and even I think the hours of development will also be reduced. So that's my opinion about this. But we were talking about the technical aspects as well, right? If you remember that like
Yep.
Flutter is very easy to pick up in terms of if you want to go into detailing of how the framework is behaving, how the things are being done. But the same thing we cannot say for Swift UI, maybe because I'm not a native iOS developer. But for Jetpack Compose, I know like it's so much to learn, it's so much to understand, and I don't know how things are working, to be honest.
Yep. Yeah. So we talked about that a little bit too. And again, I'll repeat that I'm not well educated on the implementation of those systems. But here, I'll give you the same concern that I gave you the other day,
Yeah.
which goes back to your point about declarative UI. For those watching this who are familiar with Flutter and you know what a widget tree is, you know that the widget tree in your code goes over to the device, and what you see on that device directly correlates and connects back to that widget tree that you defined in code.
Yep.
You didn't generate it. You didn't imperatively construct it. You just declared one after the other, here are the widgets that I want in this configuration. And oh, look, there they are on the screen. And in fact, if you open up the Flutter tooling, you can see a live widget tree that corresponds to what's actually running on the screen of your device. So this leaves the world of the technical details a little bit, and it gets into psychology. It gets into cognitive overhead, which I actually think is far more important for software development than most technical details. But the point is, your brain no longer has to be a compiler.
Yeah.
You wrote the tree, you see the screen. You want to change something on the screen, you adjust your tree. It's as simple as that. And here's the problem, at least when I played around with Swift UI and Jetpack Compose, the same issue exists on both platforms, but for different reasons. I go to Swift UI, I define a struct with a few configurations or something, and then I'm immediately told to start saying dot this and dot that and dot this and dot that. And I suppose that it is technically, functionally declarative UI because we're not mutating objects in memory. Instead, we're creating structs and returning those structs, and then creating new structs and returning those structs. But this is like the epitome of losing the forest for the trees. This is like putting forward the technical definition and completely forgetting that there are humans that have to deal with this stuff. The reason we want to get away from imperative code is because our brains are really bad compilers. And when we read imperative code, we are literally compiling in the human brain. So what does the widget tree do? It says, no more compiling, just say what you want. It's right here on the screen. And then Swift UI comes out and says, Well, we'll give you all of the technical academic versions of declarative UI, like technically we're not mutating stuff, but you're still going to invoke a bunch of functions, and your brain has to keep track of what's happening to structs as we go through time. And that's the biggest point, actually. Imperative UI is fundamentally tied to the movement of time into the future. Do this, then this, then this. Declarative code, I believe, when done correctly, is completely divorced from time. Like a SQL query, you don't tell the database what order to do things in at all. You just send the query and you get the data back. Same thing with Flutter widget trees. You're not telling the compositor or the renderer what order to do things. You're not even telling it really what order to construct the tree. You're just stating what the tree is.
Yeah.
So this is my big gripe with what I experienced with Swift UI. And I think it's a foundational problem. Like, I cannot possibly imagine them changing that API at this point at that level. Like, that is built in. You are stuck with that as far as I can tell. And so it really turned me off to Swift UI, and it's something I really appreciate in Flutter. If we go over to Jetpack Compose, unfortunately, there's a very similar problem. Now, in Jetpack Compose, it's not that you're calling functions and passing structs, but, and I don't know if you remember the name of the object, but there's like that magical composer object or something that's passed around, right? Do you happen to remember what that's called?
I think there are just a couple of annotations which you have to specify, like composable and all. I don't know exactly what is that object, but yeah, that's how they write it.
Right. So you apply these annotations to almost like snippets of code. I mean, snippets is not the technical term, but you apply this annotation to pieces of things, and somehow magically, like with a wand, those things become one painting on the screen. And I completely understand that doing simple things and obvious things, you don't care about the magic. But what have we all learned year after year in our careers as professional developers? Every app includes some number of non-trivial things. And when you try to tackle those things, if you come up against something that looks like magic, you are hosed, because you can't debug magic. You can't engineer magic. It's just like a wall that you can't get past. And so in the Flutter team, actually, they have somewhere in like their philosophy or mission statement, I forget exactly how it's worded, but it's something to the extent of easy things should be simple, difficult things should be possible.
Got it.
And that is a mindset that goes against, for example, some of the issues in the early days of Rails, Ruby on Rails, that easy things were easy, non-standard, which is what difficult kind of means, difficult things were just kind of impossible. It's like Rails just doesn't do that, sorry. And I'm afraid that Jetpack Compose might get itself into that kind of situation where any developer, a 5-year-old, can put text on the screen and give it a color and maybe create a floating action button or something. But if you ask them to set up a user journey that's locked by authentication with different access roles and to work that into the UI, maybe suddenly, like, it's just unclear how you do that, and there's no way to get past the magical barrier of the annotations. And by the way, the reason they're annotations is because there's a compiler build step that occurs, right? And there's an annotation processor that reads the annotation and literally generates code. So you are shipping code that's specific to your UI, and you can't see it. You don't know what it is. We'll see how this turns out. This is really early days. You and I are making predictions here, and we're just kind of talking about what we think. But I'm worried about that. I'm worried that that's going to become yet another issue dragging down the effectiveness of the Android APIs.
That's true. I mean, I don't know, like I tried to break this rule, to be honest. Like when I was playing with Flutter, I made this thing which is velocity X. Although it is not like the way you said, like, the Swift UI is creating more and more struct over each other. So same thing, what like I saw, like there were some libraries on Flutter as well. They tried to like make things
I
like
know. I saw it. I almost screamed. I almost screamed at my computer.
yeah. So that's what they were doing. Like they, for every particular method, they were creating a new widget and wrapping it with on the top of it. Let's say there's a container. If you want to give some rounding to that, then there is another container of top of it. So me and Remy was talking about it because I was trying to do the same thing, but in a different way. So then we came up with the solution of a builder pattern, right? So what we thought, like we can have different properties and it will be easy to use. Like if you have used Tailwind CSS or Swift UI, so same thing, like you have a text, you will say dot some props, and once you say a particular method, let's say make or something which I use, then it will actually do the compilation rather than because it's all immutable, so you cannot like modify a widget technically. But so that's the way we chose. And I think I believe in that. That's also, if you know what's happening, then it is great. If you don't know what's happening, then it can be really difficult to understand sometimes, because you have to learn some specific terms that how you have to deal with that. So yeah, I think that's pretty nice. And I don't know about Jetpack Compose either, like what they are heading to, but I haven't like explored in detail like how they are doing things. But like any other Jetpack library, I know that this will be easy when you see it. Like if you are a new developer, it will be very easy to make Android apps probably. But once you want to go into detail, then it becomes kind of an ocean itself. Like, you know, you don't know how things are working. Even for different Kotlin related libraries, I feel the same thing. Like I know, like, you know, this can solve my problem, but I don't know how exactly it is working. If I want to contribute to that library, then maybe it will be a little difficult for me. So even in Flutter, like I have seen many people working directly on the render tree, and they are playing with render objects. I assume like if there is something similar which is happening on Jetpack Compose or not, I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know either. I guess we'll find out as it begins to mature. And I'll just say, for like the third or fourth time, you and I are saying this with very little insights into how it's done.
Exactly.
I just have my concerns about, now, like the business side. We can talk about the business side because it's already, that's not about Jetpack Compose. That's about using a technology specific to Android or using a technology specific to iOS. But in terms of the technical details, I'll admit maybe we're getting it wrong. And if it turns out that the issues that I'm talking about aren't really issues, I'll admit it, and I'll talk about it, and I'll give it a fair shake. But again, I sat down, I tried to type out some of these solutions, and I was not impressed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we will see what happens. Okay, there's one more thing, like you know, that is like I think disturbing so many developers before using Flutter, and it is about the number of GitHub issues. Do you think like it really matters that how many numbers of GitHub issues are there?
Well, I guess, I mean, it matters to who and for what reason. It's something that the Flutter team has to concern themselves with, because some CTOs and some engineering directors, when they are reviewing new technologies that their developers ask to use, one of the things they check are open issues on GitHub. Now, the problem there is that it's just not a very good heuristic. I don't know what a better heuristic is, but it's just, I don't think that number is telling people what they think it might be telling them. The first thing to keep in mind, and I know this has been repeated in other places, but the first thing you have to know about the open issues on GitHub for Flutter is that they also include all feature requests that have ever been made.
Absolutely.
So it's like, yes, some of those are bugs. A lot of them are bugs, but a lot of them are just wish lists, things that people want. And GitHub does not allow us to separate those two numbers as far as I know. So you're going to see 5,000 plus issues. I have no idea if 2,000 of those are feature requests.
Yeah.
The next issue is granularity. If a bunch of bugs are like, my app won't start and my customers are pissed off and they want a refund, those are some really important bugs. If there are 1,000 bugs that don't apply to 99% of apps and they're minor details, should you reject the technology just because there are a bunch of bugs filed? And how about duplicate bugs? It's super, when you have an entire world of people filing bugs and people coming from different languages and cultures when they file, which interferes with how they find their own duplicates, you might have 10 versions of the same bug. And it's just tough to realize that it's the same bug in dedupe. So I think the number is pretty much meaningless from my perspective. I mean, I am building apps for customers using Flutter. There are no ship blockers for me. There are many other shipping apps with Flutter. Clearly, there are no ship blockers for them. So what does that number really mean? I don't know, but I think anyone who uses that to say we shouldn't use Flutter because of this number, I don't think they're being serious about what that number represents.
That's true. I feel the same because as you said, like, there are so many duplicate requests in terms of, like, I'm not saying duplicate from the perspective of the user who is like writing it. Maybe there is one single issue, but all of them have different kind of experience with that. So they try to create that issue, and it's very difficult to track that. Like, I have seen like there are people referring to this particular issue, and yeah, that happens. And feature requests are also there, so many feature requests for sure, like I have made many of them as well. So I think everyone has done that. But people like try to compare, when they try to compare with, let's say, React Native or some other similar framework, then they get like, okay, no man, this is not a good technology to choose. And that is totally, I think, a very bad way to understand about a technology. Maybe you should rather see what's your use case. You should try to create a POC kind of stuff using Flutter, and then maybe you are in a better position to decide, right? That's what I say. And
Yeah, for sure you should try it. And
yeah,
but I would also question, like, what's the project where React Native is actually the alternative to Flutter? I mean, React Native still uses the standard platform UI elements. You're just abstracting them into JavaScript. So if what you want is the creative power of Flutter,
yeah.
React Native isn't a substitute. They're solving two different problems at that point. But yeah, try it. Get your developers to use it. Prototype some stuff. If you have an existing company with an existing app, put your heads together and say, okay, what do we know are the riskiest aspects of our app? Take those, the riskiest aspects, and go prove or disprove those things in Flutter. Relying on that number, and let's also put this into perspective. Typically, and by the way, I don't know if you can hear sounds outside, if it sounds like a war zone here, there people have been launching fireworks for like 2 weeks straight. It's when a company considers a new technology, these considerations usually aren't daily. It's like, okay, it's been a couple years since we last asked this question. Let's see if there's something else we should be using. To say yes or no based on a number on the header of GitHub as to whether you're going to adopt a transformative technology for the next 2 years is absurd. You are not being serious about the payroll and logistic consequences of doing it or not doing it. So to reject it outright based on 5,000 bugs, I just think that's irresponsible at the level of a tech lead or a director or a CTO. This is going to impact your company for years, whether you decide to do it or not do it, whether you decide to use Flutter or React Native or something else. This is a multi-year investment. You need to do more work than that to vet what you're going to go with, right?
And especially the interesting part is that when you are targeting multiple platforms altogether, then obviously there will be as many as issues, because you are not dealing with just one single platform here. You are dealing with Android, you are dealing with iOS, maybe Raspberry Pi bugs are also there. Maybe someone
Yeah.
has, like me, I have tried to play that Flutter application in one of my Galaxy phones, right? So there is that issue as well. So I think it's when you are targeting so many platforms, then obviously there will be different kinds of issue. Some issues are related to Windows, let's say. Some related issues are from Mac OS itself. So, and every day, everyone is upgrading, like Windows is upgrading itself, Mac OS is upgrading, iPad OS is upgrading. So obviously there will be issues for sure. And to all my viewers, that's what I wanted to, like, why I ask this question to Matt, because he has worked in the Flutter team, and what he like thinks about those issues is very much important to other people, like to hear from you. So Matt, like coming back to you working in the Flutter team, so I just want to know how was your experience like working in the Flutter team, and what did you exactly worked on?
Sure. So it was a great experience. For 3 years before I worked on the Flutter team, I worked over at Nest. Technically, we were a part of Google, then we were a part of Alphabet, and then we were a part of Google again, and it was hard to keep track of. But we had our own little campus over there in Palo Alto, which is about 15 minutes away from the main Google campus, whereas the Flutter team was squarely at the Google headquarters. So my experience on the Flutter team in a lot of ways was the opposite of what it was at Nest. Nest was this highly political, constant meetings, constant disagreement, just kind of really irritating place to work as an app developer. There were politics always at play. Very rarely were decisions made within our little team based on what was a more beneficial technical approach. Typically, it was about who's calling the shots.
Yeah.
I went over to the Flutter team, and it was like the complete opposite. The leadership and this is obviously the personal side. We can talk about what I worked on in a second, but I just want to give people some insights into what it's like in a team at Google, because I know a lot of people, they have dreams of going to work there. So the first thing, it depends a lot on which team you join. It really does, because again, Nest was a part of Google or a part of Alphabet, and it worked completely differently than the Flutter team. So the leadership on the Flutter team, incredibly polite, patient people. They as much as possible, they want to defer to you, the developer, to make the decisions that you think are best in the area that you're working on. They understand that you're experienced. They understand that you're well educated. They understand that you are here to help drive this project and help the world adopt it. So the political dynamics are essentially non-existent, at least from my perspective on the team, which was excellent. And also almost zero meetings. It's like if you're in the office, you get to work on what you're working on. You get together with people as you need to, but not this daily constant meeting schedule where you're talking about what you're going to do, and then you never have time to actually do it because you're always in the next meeting talking about what you're going to do after that. So I was very happy with kind of all of the organizational dynamics on the team. In a beautiful campus, of course. If anyone ever gets to go visit the Mountain View campus that Google has, it's a great campus. I enjoyed working there. We were in 3 different buildings in my time on the Flutter team, but always a really nice place to work. Now, in terms of what I worked on, it was almost exclusively the Android embedding, which is kind of a tragic irony that I joined the Flutter team to get away from Android. And then I ended up offering to essentially rebuild the Android embedding for Flutter. And I spent most of my time, most of the 2-year period, kind of rewriting a lot of the Android embedding. So when I joined the Flutter team, this was before add to app was something that anyone was really talking about. We knew we needed it, but there was nothing on the table for add to app, which meant all of the presuppositions for Flutter at that time is that you would build an entire app with Flutter, which for those of you who know the Android side of things, that meant one activity. There was one activity for the whole app. That one activity hosted a full screen Flutter experience, and you can navigate in Flutter, but it was just one activity. And on the iOS side, it was one view controller for your whole app. Well, these companies started coming around saying, look, we've got 500 existing Android screens. We would love to add Flutter in, like, we want to make this screen with Flutter and then spread out from there. But the Android APIs assumed, like in their fundamental nature, they assumed there would only ever be one activity, and that activity would always be available. And this was exceptionally problematic for plugins because the activity was exposed to all the Flutter plugins. So if you're writing a camera plugin or a Bluetooth plugin or what have you, you would go get the activity and you would assume there's exactly one and it's always there. If there's one thing any Android developer knows about a normal app, there's never just one activity and you never know if it's going to be there. So my work was to essentially take the reality of what happens on Android and carefully adjust how the Android embedding within Flutter operates so that activities can come and go. Sometimes there's an activity, sometimes there's not. And sometimes you launch an app into a Flutter activity and then you go to an Android activity. And sometimes you launch with an Android activity and then you go to a Flutter activity. All of these weird situations is what I had to deal with. And so I kind of rewrote most of that embedding. And then there was another member of the team who made kind of a similar amount of changes to the Gradle configuration. So that's the build system. I was dealing with the Java code. He was dealing with the Gradle build system. And then there were some similar changes made on the iOS side, but for various reasons, the iOS side didn't have to be rewritten to the extent that the Android side did.
Yeah, I think I should mark this interview as an uncensored interview. There are a lot of things people don't know about. Okay, so like, what do you think? Like, is it now in a position where people should use Flutter in their existing application? Like, still, is that ways open for them?
Yeah, I mean, add to app is definitely something you can use right now. It's still a work in progress, and that's because add to app can be as complicated as whatever normal app or traditional app you build. So there are a whole bunch of apps that for sure you can use add to app and you're not going to have any problem. There are some apps that, for example, we've seen in the Chinese markets, apps that are so large, so complicated, they ship pieces out of band. Those scenarios are probably not good candidates at this point for add to app. Yeah, I think it would take substantial custom work within the Flutter engine to pull that off. But I'm sure that's on the trajectory for the team. I'm sure the team eventually wants to make any add to app situation reasonable and easy to use. But it's on a spectrum. So for a lot of people, the answer is absolutely yes. For some people, it's like you can, but you're going to have to do a lot of work to make that happen.
And how many people are in there, like in the team, if you know, and if you can share about it, like, so that people can understand, like, how many people are doing these wonderful things. Like, I
Yeah.
think there are not many people as compared to other teams probably in Google.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would guess that there's somewhere between 2 to 3 dozen developers on the Flutter team. And sitting near the Flutter team are some members of the Dart team, the Dart programming language. So that's also a team within Google. But yeah, I'd say I'd say that whole effort, I would be surprised if it was more than 75 people. Dart plus Flutter plus like developers plus management plus DevRel. I would be surprised if it's larger than 75 people.
That's true, because when this web thing and desktop support was not there, when I visited, like I met with Flutter team, because at that time I think the number was even lesser, right? Like very very lesser, because maybe they were not looking into that direction at that time. But now, since there are so many things to do, so obviously the numbers are increasing. But yeah, I think it's still like very less people as compared to what I have seen. Like, I have heard that what other companies have, or what other technologies have, like number of people working on that. So I think that's a very good achievement as well for Flutter team to have something like that. And especially what I have seen, like, there are so many people today using Flutter. I think the COVID-19 thing has affected so many things that maybe some things have stopped. Otherwise, I was seeing like a lot of people are experimenting more and more. There are a lot of startups coming up with that. Okay, so now I think this is one of the kind of question which everyone would ever like ask you, and that is like how you should get the job in Google, or how you should get Flutter job. And I would rephrase it a little bit like, I mean, it should not be how to get a Flutter job, because like it's something different. How to get jobs in any company like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, or whatever. Like, you have that experience.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day as well, and I have an equally negative take on that question. Well, not the question, but the reality of getting a job. So first of all, I'll explain why I don't know how to get a job at Google. And the reason I don't know is because when I joined Nest, Nest had already been acquired by Google, but Nest was still using its pre-existing hiring practices. So now I still did the same amount of interviewing. So it was like an HR phone call, then a coding phone call, and then they flew me out, and I had a full day of 5 rounds of interviews. So 5 1-hour rounds with a lunch in the middle. That's standard, even for the rest of Google. But what was asked of me in that interview, or in all the interviews, were things related to Android. And it turned out that as an Android developer, I knew how to do things in Android. So I did just fine in that interview and I got the job. But that's not how Google proper works. Google, you go into those 5 interviews and maybe you get something that is related to what you do in 1 or 2 of those interviews, but you're going to get questions that are computer science questions, algorithm and data structure questions. And so, and I don't know algorithms and data structures because I'm an app developer. So I don't write algorithms or data structures. So if I had to get hired back at Google and they asked me to go through the interview process, I don't think I'd get a job, because the things that you have to demonstrate are not the things that are needed for the job. And I refuse to study those independently. And I don't know them because I don't use them in my daily life. So that's my, as you can tell, it's a general frustration I have with the industry. Now, the interesting thing to keep in mind about Google, and this is probably true for most of the top tech companies, is that the demand for people who want to work there far outpaces the supply of jobs. In other words, they need you a lot less than you want them. What this results in is that Google and probably Facebook and Apple, and to some extent Amazon, though I think Amazon kind of grows in a lot more areas, so they might have to be a little more lenient with who they pick up. But the idea is, we don't care if we reject 1,000 good enough candidates. Like, okay, 1,000 people could work here and we rejected them. We don't care about that. We care about whether or not we allowed one bad person through, one person that isn't good enough. Now, those numbers are, I'm throwing those numbers out there. I don't know what the real ratio is. But the idea is that from Google's perspective, the worst thing they can do is hire someone that's incompetent or incapable when they need them to do that job. And if it requires rejecting a bunch of capable people to be sure of it, they will, because that's what the supply and demand curve allows them to do. If we were in a world where there aren't many software developers, I assure you that wouldn't be the case. And that's why, by the way, startups don't often do that. Startups can't afford to reject a bunch of good people just to avoid hiring one bad person. They actually have to really get in there and decide for sure, is this person good enough or are they not good enough? And we are going to act on that decision directly. Startups don't have the time or the money to kind of engage in the hiring practices that Google and Facebook and Apple do.
That's true. That's true. I think they also have a name I read somewhere. FANG. Okay, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. I heard it from
the FANG
Fang.
stocks.
Fang. Yeah, I think that's what they call it. Yeah. So basically, the idea is for all the viewers that if you want to get a Flutter job in a startup, then obviously they are gonna ask Flutter questions. So then you can prepare for Flutter questions. But in any case, like if you are anyhow targeting these companies, the giant companies, then probably they need more than that. You might have to prepare for 3 or 4 months for data structure algorithms and all these things, because I have seen many people doing that. So yeah, that's the idea how to get
Yeah, and I'll also add one more thing, and that to Google's credit on this point, if you get hired at Google, it is conceivable that no matter what team you join, you might eventually join any other team. There are not, there are some permissions involved with that, but there are no strict barriers between teams. So if you wanted to join, if you wanted to go from, let's say like I was working on the Nest app.
Yeah.
So my specialty there is Android, and not even Android at the tooling level, but Android at the application level. And then I decide, you know what? I'm going to go work on the Google search team, a team that has nothing to do with Android or apps or anything. I'm going to go down and start messing with the tooling for the entire search system. You're not stopped and told, okay, you need to go through a massive technical screening process. it's really, you just express your interest to go. You'll have a talk with the managers over there. If they do need to ask you some technical questions, they might, but it's not going to be like a whole interview process over again. And so to keep mobility between teams very lightweight, they have to ensure that every person they hire to work on Gmail essentially is competent enough to transfer and possibly work on search. And that's a really tough thing to do. And so that's another reason to keep the bar really, really high.
But now people will ask you, like, you got the job finally in Google, then why did you leave it? Like, what was what I guess this was the toughest decision probably for you to leave Google, right? And what came to your mind?
It should have been a tough decision. Obviously going from a lot of money, great benefits, good team, good product, to no money, no benefits, no product, no nothing. That should have been a tough decision. But it's like when I joined the Flutter team, I really wanted to do part technical, part education. And I was very clear about that from the beginning. But there were things that happened that eventually ended up with the reality that either I could be on the Flutter team as a developer. I guess they would have let me go to DevRel as well, but I hate traveling. And DevRel is like, they live in airplanes.
Yeah.
So my options were stay on the team.
Did you consider COVID-19? Like thinking
No,
about
actually, I left like 2 weeks before COVID-19 became a whole thing. So this was, maybe they would have fired me anyways. Who knows? But no, it was just that my options were stay on the team and be a developer, or leave the team and then I can go do education. And so what I'm trying to prove right now, what I'm trying to figure out is, can I develop a career teaching people how to use Flutter, helping the world adopt Flutter? Can I actually keep my house in Silicon Valley? Can I actually have a career doing it? And I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. So between, I'm going to have a bunch of free education coming out on YouTube, but I'm also going to have some paid courses. I'm going to try to publish a book. I offer corporate training, like I mentioned, in partnership with Very Good Ventures. I'm trying to see if there's a market there for actually teaching people how to work with Flutter, and we'll see if it works out or not. But I really wanted to try the educational side of things. I had had enough at that point of kind of working on the technical details of Flutter, and maybe one day I'll go back. I have nothing against that. And like I said, I thought it was a great team and a great experience there. But I had just reached the point at the moment where I was far more interested in education and creativity than I was about how to port this Android SDK method over to Flutter through the engine. I had enough of that stuff.
That's awesome, man. Like I think you are also in the path of moksha, like me. So we are almost trying to solve the same problem. So Matt, this is probably the last question I would ask you. What do you think, what's a success for you as a developer? Like if someone says like you are a developer, what's success for you? Like, is it about earning money, more and more money, or is it something else?
Well, do you mean me specifically, or do you mean like the archetype of what do I think a developer should strive to do?
I mean, both of them, like for you as well, and what you would suggest other developers like around the globe, because I don't see anyone, like whether he is junior developer, senior developer, I don't know, like people know what exactly they should do in life after that, or how they should see things.
Okay, I'll just answer it in two different ways then. So we'll take the question of what am I hoping to achieve versus what do I think other developers maybe should consider.
Yes.
For me, everything right now is about whether or not I can prove out this business. So if you told me a year from now, I'm paying all of my expenses and able to save money and run a self-sufficient Flutter education and training company, that's awesome. That's all I'm gunning for right now. And after that, where does it go? I don't know. It could morph more into app development. It could go beyond Flutter and it could become a generic application development education company. But if you tell me a year from now that this is all working out in terms of revenue, that's awesome for me. Yeah. For other developers out there, I mean, everyone's got the things that they're chasing in life. Obviously there's the cliche about people chasing money and then they get the money and then they're not happy even though they have all the money. That's the case in this industry as it is with any other. And that's because at some point you're going to have to answer the question, what am I going to spend my money on?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'll just spend my money on a nice car and a big house and a private jet. And the thing is, once you do enough work to earn that amount of money, you absolutely will not want to spend it on a car or a jet. Because as cool as those things are, you're going to look at that purchase and be like, wow, 3 or 5 years of my professional life just became that car. What a shitty deal. 5 years of your life for a car. And then like you get in one car wreck and insurance is like, okay, we'll give you 50 cents on the dollar to repair it. But it's just once you earn enough money to spend on things that you don't absolutely need, you're actually going to be very critical about what you buy. And you're not going to buy the frivolous stuff. And if you do buy the frivolous stuff, you're going to be one of those people who has the cool stuff and isn't really happy. So the question is, what are you going to do with the money? And if you answer that question now, then 1, you will know what to do with the money if you earn it. Or 2, you might realize that you shouldn't be living for money. And maybe what you really want is to work from some other country, or you want to be able to work remotely for one reason or another. Maybe you don't even want to be a developer after all. But if you want to get to your real goals, you've got to dig a lot deeper than just what is everyone else doing.
That's true. That's true. I think I would say the same thing. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Matt, for like I think this is really one of the best sessions I have hosted. Like I have only hosted a couple of sessions to be honest, but I
Hey,
really,
you're walking it back now. Like you were giving me a compliment, you're making me feel great, and then you're like, well, I mean, I've only done this like one time
yeah.
before, but this is the best of the 2 times that I've done this.
No, I just want to say like whatever I thought like I should ask you, you gave a really good answers to all those things. Like I wanted to hear your opinion so that others can also hear it. Because I have talked to you a couple of times. I already know what you feel and what are the things which we have already like talked about. But I wanted to present the same thing to others because I see like a lot of people are just starting with their career, especially on this channel or the people who are watching currently. So for them, I think this is really good to know about from someone from who has like worked on different startups probably or in a big company, and now he's doing something else. Like he's experimenting with losing everything behind, like no money, no home or whatever. Like that.
That's right.
Actually,
I
that
gave
kind of life.
up. I gave up all my income and traded it in for this barrage of studio lights that are beaming on me right now.
So yeah, obviously that's a tough decision for me. Like you said, like it was not a like tough decision, but I think it's a very tough decision, especially when you see like what will happen. Like, you don't know what will happen like in the future. So thank you so much for giving your precious time. I know that it's somewhere like maybe it's a midnight or something, but yeah, I think you also enjoyed a little bit at least with
Yeah,
talking
for
to me.
sure. Yeah, it was a great time. Happy to do it. And I have a feeling that this will be the first of many such interviews and discussions moving forward between you and me about Flutter.
Yes, absolutely. And I congratulate you for like, starting this channel again, like whatever the name you are gonna prefer. I'm not sure about that, but all the
Super
very best.
declarative. We know that right now. Super declarative. That's all all
Awesome.
the exclamation points.
Yeah, you are yourself a brand, man. Like you, people can see you. That is a brand. Just look at me and look at yourself.
That's
So
right.
yeah,
Unabashedly yellow. All things yellow and exclamation points.
I'll ask you for a t-shirt. Don't worry, for a cap as well.
I'll hook you up. I'll hook you up.
Okay, all the very best for the next journey which you are now going forward. And thank you so much for joining. And I'll probably catch up with you very soon with another this kind of interview or maybe some other session or something. So yeah, that was Matt Carroll from X Flutter or Flutter team. What I should say, X Flutterer, like
Sure,
people
that
call it
works.
X Googler. So yeah, you are
X
X
Googler,
Googler
X
as well,
Flutter.
X Flutterer as well, and X Millennial. Will that work?
Sure, go for
I'm
it.
talking in terms of a reference, so people know it. So obviously, so thank you so much. Bye bye, and take care, man. All the very best. And yeah, if you want to just say thanks to the audience.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks everyone for watching. We always appreciate the attention, and big thanks to PK for setting this up and having me on. And it was a great time. I look forward to doing it again. Take it
Yes.
easy.
Thank you. Bye bye.